If you have a one-bedroom apartment in the inner city at the moment, even if it's in one of these amazing buildings like the Grand, 29 Market Street, Temple Court, the Hero Building, unless you have a dire need, we don't recommend you sell right now. Let me walk you through why. Prior to COVID, our audience for one-bedroom properties was largely investors, about 70% in fact. That's people inquiring on the property or coming through an open home. Since COVID, we've seen that audience reduce to less than 5%. That's a huge piece of our market no longer looking. In Victoria, particularly Melbourne's inner city, our investors were faced with very trying times through COVID. We had high vacancy rates, long periods of no rent return, and if the owner was lucky enough to be rented, often the rent was at less than 50% of what they had been achieving prior to COVID. It's pleasing to report that the vacancy rates have normalised and our average weekly rent is now back to an all-time high. The normalising of the rental market, whilst very welcome, hasn't necessarily been enough to ease the woes of our investors. After hanging on through difficult times through COVID, they're now facing new challenges. So whilst the rents have gone up, so too have the interest rates. And there's been new legislation which requires many investors to spend money bringing their property up to minimum standards, and also compliance, which now needs to be done annually and biannually. One of the biggest changes we've noticed is that many investors for the first time have received a land tax bill, and that is something that they're now going to receive year on year. Couple that with those who have Airbnb properties, they are now facing additional taxes for Airbnb. All the while, we are all facing increased cost of living pressures. Due to these new challenges, we've got more and more investors who are wanting to come to market and sell their investment properties. As I mentioned earlier, we unfortunately don't have the supply of buyers to fulfil the need, and hence we have a supply and demand issue. The very few investors who are in the market have an abundance of choice when they're out shopping for an investment property. They are looking for very high returns and they are able to make really shrewd offers and find the owner that is the most desperate and in need of selling, and that has seen the one-bedroom prices be driven down. If you have a two-bedroom property, particularly if you have a car park, an outdoor space or an aspect, that part of the market is performing very differently and prices are actually at a premium right now. For those investors who are thinking of coming to market due to financial pressure, it's important to remember that the rental market is at an all-time high. Our property management team have been doing some amazing rent reviews and being able to lift the rent to a point where our investors don't actually need to sell. If you haven't already been talking to an expert like our team, I highly recommend you do so to make sure that you are getting the best return and that you can perhaps keep the property until the sales market is in a more positive position. If you are an investor and you do decide you must sell, I urge you, please make sure you are speaking to the right agent. I have seen some awful pricing, and whilst I just mentioned that the prices have fallen, they certainly don't need to be selling at the plummeted prices we have seen some properties sell at. It's important that you speak to an expert, particularly if your property sits within the warehouse, heritage or unique category. Regardless of your property needs, the team and I at Harcourts Melbourne City are here to help, and we welcome your call.